Charlie Ward recently joked, the difference between conspiracy theory and fact right now? 6 months. All the conspiracy theories in the past have all been just that, theories. But unless you get really out on the fringe, they pretty much remain just theories and never really actualized. After 2020, all that's really changed. Some of those conspiracy theories of the past are now being actualized. It might be, though, that we need more people to care about what's going on, to change from citizens of convenience to citizens of freedom. Now, to see one part of the problem is, in effect, in some ways, seeing a larger part of the whole. And one of those problems comes with the phone.
You have to trick people. They're not gonna do it. If the FBI came out and said, hey, from now on, we're gonna make it a law, you have to have a tracking device and carry it around with you all day long so that we know where you are. And we also want to tap into your bank account, your bank accounts. And also we want to know who you're talking to and who you associate with. Stop by our retail location over here, FBI.com, and pick up your surveillance tool today.
Yet after using it, you get hooked, even after you find out the real intentions.
They can see everything about you. They can see everything about what your device is doing, and they can do whatever they want with your device. You, on the other hand, owned the device. Well, rather, you paid for the device. But increasingly, these corporations own it. Increasingly, these governments own it. And increasingly, we are living in a world where we do all the work, right? We pay all the taxes. We pay all the costs. But we own less and less.
Then you just shrug and say, well, I really like it, so I guess it's worth it. Part of the plan then, as I see it, is to break us from that spell. And the way that happens is to basically get us to stop sacrificing our freedom for convenience. I don't think we can all go cold turkey. I certainly can't. But I started to get rid of one app after another. And I'm looking at actually updating my phone. Hopefully, as we move along, we'll get more of the default where we get the choice rather than the companies having the choice. And then they just throw a little button at us that says, I accept the terms of service, even if they might change dramatically from one day to the next. I just accept it blindly. Because, hey, even if I could read it, I'm still not going to understand it. And we need to break from that spell. Look how easily in 2020, off of one event, how much control was enabled or enacted. And do you think that control will ever really be relinquished? Think of in the past, like the Patriot Act, or even income tax, which was said to be just temporary. All those things, once they're enacted, the government and corporations love the power they have. So it's really hard to kind of take that back, but we can. Look at how easily things change in 2020 off of just one condition. And then think of all the other different angles that can be done, like a coming war, let's say, or a fringe element coming true that maybe most people said was ridiculous. Yeah, those elements are much more radical than what we experienced in 2020. And yet, in 2020, that one element was able to radically change everything around the world in a scary short period of time. So think about all those other angles. Now, if you've traded your freedom for convenience, then those elements are going to be a lot easier to kind of enact upon you.
And you have to understand that all the stuff we talked about today, the government says everything they do is legal, right? And they go, so it's fine. Our perspective as a public should be, well, that's actually the problem, because this isn't okay. The scandal isn't how they're breaking the law. The scandal is that they don't have to break the law.
So the thing of it is, you've got the law. They're not breaking the law. And then you've got habits, which are really hard to change. Once you get into the habit of using your phone, it's really hard to radically change that habit. It weaves into so many pieces of our lives. And since governments and corporations don't want to give up that control, then what's to be done? And that's where I think we're headed, with significant events that will change the way things are right now. An example of that is even just a couple of years ago. You might not have thought that the alternatives to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter were even possible. Yet the alternatives are now very much alive and growing. But for some, even that isn't enough. One way to look at this is a comment from one of my subscribers, Kimberly Smith. And she had this to say. I have found it's like going through the different stages of grief. I still have a very close family member who thinks I've lost my mind. It's unimaginable to them that our own people would do this. I'm simply trying to love them through it. That's beautifully stated. It's because if you look at all the different elements, no matter how you cut it, the end result of war, all the distractions, is actually get people to stay divided by race, by gender, by location, any number of things. The movies and the media reinforce all the division that we see. Kimberly makes a good point, to love them through it, but that ideal is really hard. When other people think you're nuts, it's not that bad, but when other family members do, it becomes a whole different story. If all of us on whatever side you might think you're on came to have the perspective of loving others through it, I think we'd be much better off. It's a really hard thing to do, but I think it's an ideal to kind of move towards. Despite the predictions of ongoing war or apocalypse or dramatic changes to what your life might look like right now, there are a lot of things you can't really have an effect over anyway. Since very few of your direct actions are going to actually result in not having a war or an apocalypse happen, it's best to just let that roll. This alone can enable a lot more positive energy to love people through the different changes that we'll see. I think there's a lot of positive elements that have already happened and more on the way. And although there will be enough misinformation kind of weaved in amongst all that, I believe there's a lot more positive changes coming. And when you hear Trump say sooner than you think is enough to be positive without having to stick to a specific timeline. So those are just some thoughts. If you found them helpful, be sure to give it a like. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.